Hello and welcome to another episode of full stack development using basic HTML and JavaScript. In our last episode, we scaffolded our front end and we designed our form and our data grids, the two tables. Now, I would want us to bring in JavaScript so that we can actualize some of the functionalities. And remember, this is part of a series where we are doing the HTML, where we will introduce JavaScript, and then after all the functionalities has been done and we've stored our data in memory, we will need to persist it and store it in local storage. Then we will proceed and do a data synchronization service to a backend, and finally we will do a backend in JavaScript powered by Node.js and Express. So without further ado, let us do our bit in bringing in JavaScript to store data in memory. Remember, we have already done the index.html. This is our template, our front-end template. We've already done our CSS, that is what is styling our form and tables. And now we want to bring in our JavaScript. Basic introduction of what we will need. And the first thing is declaring our prices setup. Prices, to type prices. So this we will just store this in an object and say this is for adults, it's 100 shillings, and then for a child this is 50 shillings. So our object looks like that. And then usually I'll do a semicolon, but JavaScript these days doesn't require us to terminate statements in semicolons. We will have active trips, and we just comment active trips, our collection for active trips, and that would be an array. So we'll have our completed trips. That will also be an array. So let's declare this. Let's say let active trips be an array, an empty array. Then we will come and declare our completed trips as an array. Now, my convention is using the snake case, where the first character in my functions and variables declaration is lowercase, and any other subsequent name in that variable, it begins with a capital letter. So that's the convention. It's good to declare that. And now let us introduce an event where if you click on the start trip, then you're able to add a trip on this. So let's see how we can add an event here on this start trip button. So to do that, let's come to our button. Our button has an ID of start trip, so this is what we'll use to just add an event. So I'll say add, and I'm commenting for the sake of just explaining the code to another developer who will be following this. So add a click event listener to add a click event listener to the form submit button. So that's why I said you're not going to use the default HTML event for submitting a form, and instead we will just instruct JavaScript to help us do that. So we'll say this is vanilla JavaScript document dot get element by ID. So we are just selecting that element based on the ID we have given it. Then we are adding an event, add event listener, add an event listener of click. Then what should click do? Ideally it should have an action, an event handler. So that is a function that will handle the click event. So we say start trip. So we don't have the start trip function. That is what we will begin with. And probably we can go ahead and declare a couple of functions that we are going to need. So the first one will be the start trip function. We'll start the trip. So then after we have submitted the trip, we need to clear our form. So we need our form to be to empty all the values that have been entered. Once you click submit or start trip, then anything that was in these fields need to be cleared. And for that, we will have a function to clear the form, and it will be called the clear customer form. I like thinking about what I'm going to introduce before I even write the core of the functionality. And then remember, after clearing the form and starting the trip, we'll need to update our DOM. So this table here, active trips, need to be updated with the data that was collected from this form. And remember, after we have our data here, we will have a function to complete the trip. So that button to complete the trip will trigger an update on this completed trips table. So let's see how we are going to do that. So here we'll have an update active trips table, and then once that is started, we need to start our timer, and therefore we'll have also a function that we will call within the updated active trips table. So we'll start a timer, and for the timer we'll bring in a library called moments.js to make it easy for us to work with dates and time. Then after that, the button that we'll have to complete the trips, we will be calling a function called end a trip, and then after we end a trip, we anticipate now to update our completed trips table. So we will update completed trips table. So that also now updates the HTML, the rows for our completed trips table. Then we'll have a couple of utility functions. Let's say we will need to format our date. That's why now we'll bring in moments.js. It's among the places where we bring in moments.js. And then we will need also to format our time, our duration. So we'll format the duration, just to allow us to present the duration in hours and minutes. So the duration will be the difference between the start time and the end time. So I mean, just basically comment here and say start time. So it's the difference of start time and end time. So basically that is how we will structure our JavaScript, and we could begin with our function to start a trip. So we begin here and say function start trip. In fact, it's here, start trip. I think the IDE, it's looking at what has been declared here, start trip. So it won't have any arguments, let's say start trip. And what we want to do is just to see whether it's working or not. So I usually like throwing an alert and say hello there. Now you can see whether our JavaScript is working. Once I click that, I should see something, but now I don't see anything. So it means we might have an error somewhere. And the way you debug errors is you come to the console and see what is happening. So you can see we have an uncaught reference error, and we have to click on this to see active trips. So it's complaining where we have our active trips comment. Let me see what that is. Okay, what's this? There is an error. It was an oversight. I don't know what that was. So now it should work. Let me just reload this. I don't think we have any errors in the console. Yeah, we don't have any errors. So it should work. Yes. So it means our JavaScript is working and it's wired properly. So we can proceed and write the entire function. Our start trip function here is going to start by getting data inputs. So those are the fields. So we will define those variables that will contain that data. So ID number. The first one will be ID number. This will be document dot get element by ID. So this is pure JavaScript. This is how you get variables from any input. You can use the document dot get element by ID or even a class. So we say this is ID number. So you have to be careful when picking these IDs. Any typo error will result into a syntax error. So you ask for a value. So this ID number, this ID should exist in a form input. So you see here it's the same as the ID here. So we are saying for an element with the ID of ID number, then get for us the value that has been entered there. The same, we will do the same for all other elements. Like for this select, we will get element by ID gender and then get the value. So that's the way you get your input. So I'm going to duplicate these 4 times so that we just updating the variables here. So you're saying the name, the customer name, we should get it by ID. It should be name, and then the gender, we should do the same. Gender, we should type gender. And when you're using an IDE like VS Code, you can actually use Ctrl D to highlight any other similar string. So for customer type, we'll say you need customer type. So you see it has updated in both areas. So that's how you use, you highlight the first value, then you click Ctrl D or Command D on Mac. So the other thing is we'll do some validations. We have gotten our data. So let's do some validation. And we will say, as much as we did the client-side validation, we will say if for some reason the gender for the value for ID number is falsy, or that of name is falsy, you can see the negation operator. You say please fill all mandatory details, and then at that point we terminate execution of the script. So now we can define our entity. Our entity is a trip. Again, we package this into an object. So a trip will have the following attributes. We'll have an ID. It's like an auto increment in databases. This will be our serial number for each trip, and we will assign it to a timestamp for now. Then we'll have an ID number. An ID number. We'll have name. We'll have a gender, and we'll have a customer type. Customer type, and we'll also have the slash time. So So this will be new date, and we could do a status. By default, when you're creating this, it will be new. We'll say it's new, and then we'll say our active trips will be, you just push this new element. So in an array, as a data structure, when you're adding a new element, you push. So we'll push this trip. So remember, we did not assign, since it's an object and we have a variable of a similar name, we have a constant of similar name, there's no need for us to keep on saying that ID number equals to ID number. So that if you have the same variable declaration, then you can just state the declaration, and this will be what has been populated above. So already we have assigned all the variables that we get from the form, we have assigned them to our entity, and we are pushing that entity into our active trips array. So then maybe we could just check and see, we could console.log and see what we get. Console.log active trips. So our console is clean, everything is okay. So here I'll do, maybe we can do Jamie Jones, the customer ID, adjacent number, the gender, just say male, customer type dot, and see what we get. So saying get element by ID, which line? Oh, so I thought, I had a feeling we were using JavaScript, but we were using jQuery. Sorry for that. It's getting mad because we, instead of using an attribute, we are just calling a function. We are getting values. So that's how you debug JavaScript as you go. You are bound to make errors. So let's just clean our console. Let's go to our console and say same details I had entered. So that we have our console. What we need to check is whether our object has been assigned properly, the values, identity. So we submit, and the messages, you should have an object. So you can see our object here, it has all the attributes we've entered. So it has a customer type, gender, ID, ID number, and then the name. So this is what we are going to use to update our active trips table. And so it means after getting these, I'll just leave that console there for now. So we're saying we need to update, we need to call the update table method. So let's just call update active trips, update active trips table. So there's somewhere we had said we're going to update, so we need to declare that function. So this function update active trips table. That way. So we need to write this function and say that this function populates our active trips body. So the table body. So say the document, the tbody is document.query selector. You can select any DOM element, and then these will be active trips table body. So where we are getting that active trips is here. That table should have an ID, so it's called active trips. So you're saying for this table, so just get us the table body, this one. If that table body as a DOM element wasn't existing, then we would instantly get an error when we try to do this. So we're saying document.query selector, the query, getting the ID active trips, which is similar to this. Any typo results into a syntax error. So that is where we're going to append our data. So we will say that this table body, its inner HTML is going to contain the following. So inner HTML equals active trips. So this is the array that we want to loop through, so to speak, loop through every trip and create a row. So we say, so on your map for each trip, then we use a template here, string template. So we say we are creating table row dynamically. So this is how you create a dynamic attributes. So we'll have a table data. Then we'll have the ID, the name, customer type, the date, and a counter and an action. So those are about 6. So we'll say we'll just duplicate them. 3, 4, 5, 6. So that should do it. So remember, what we're trying to do here is to populate the ID, name, trip, start time, duration, and action. These now will complete our trip. So how do we do it? So in JavaScript, when you're outputting any variable in a DOM element, that you can use the string template. So we'll say trip. Remember, we have stored all our data in an object. We just scroll up so that we can see that object clearly. So this is the data that we are going to output in our new table row. So we're saying first one is trip.id. So the ID number, because this should be customer ID. So this one will be the ID number. Then we just copy this. We're going to use it several times. Just update the variable. Then that's it for now. So for the last one, we're going to format it. This will be the start time. So the second one will be name. Then we have gender. Then we have customer type. We have a gender. We don't have the gender, so we could just ignore that and just do the type. We don't have gender. Okay. Then here we want to have our just declare it. We want to have our trip dot start time. Start time, but we need to format that because remember we got a really, this will be a string. We need to format this, and then after that now we need to start to declare a field that will take our timer. So this will be this a class of time counter. So this one will be a calculation, and we will see how we do it. So we say this is the ID of counter, and then we can calculate it by the trip ID, which is also a timestamp for the current time. So that should do it. This just ensures we are in the context of a trip for us to run the timer. Then for the last one, it's an action, it's a button. So this one we just call it button. Let's call it end trip. End trip. So that's it. The button. So we say we just attach a listener. On click. So on click, you should just call the end trip function. So here we pass the trip.id. So that now we are going to search by that ID in our array, find an index, and then we can end that particular trip. Now we have a few functions here that we need to create. So we need to start our timer, and we also need to close end our trip. So before further ado, let me just start the timer. Let's just do function start timer. Then let's also declare the end trip. So we say function end trip. So those are the key functions that we need now to activate our update table, our update trips table. And you also need to remember, we said that once you update these, then you need to also clear the customer field. So the customer fields in the form. So we say also clear our customer form, but we don't have that function. So this function, the update trips table, triggered us to add two functions, one for creating a timer and the other one for ending a trip. Now we also have the need to clear the form. So this is a basic reset. So we say function clear customer form. So we'll get the form. So we say document dot get element by ID. We say we want to get the customer form. The customer form dot reset. Oh no! So you have to be careful with the IntelliSense here. You mess you up. So let's talk about starting the timer. Now for this, I need to bring in a JavaScript library to help us with that. So we say we need cdn.js where we get libraries. So I need a library called moments. Yeah, here we have it. So you can see its function is to pass, validate, manipulate, and display dates. So I want to pick a mature version, so 2.9. So just take the mean. Script. So that's how you pick resources, common JS libraries. So this one I'll just put it in our HTML. And I'll say just below our CSS. So I've pasted it there. So they have an integrity check and every other policy. So that's the advantage of CDN.js. You know, most of the files that they have stored there, in fact all of them have been vetted. No, so the probability of malicious code is negligible. So I'll come to my function here. We called it start timer. So what we are going to do, we are going to set interval for 1 second. So set interval. So the function here, I like just completing and then saying just setting the interval, the number. So that's a second. It will run every second. Then we will say now for our function, for our callback function, we say that's our anonymous function. We can write our code in there. So we say declare our counter. So here our counter equals document dot get element by ID. This will be now for our counter. Let's see, our timer will be called within the method that is updating our trips table. So what we want to provide for our timer is the trip ID, a trip ID, and a start time. So we call it just besides where we are declaring our row. So remember, we're in a loop, so let's just complete this and say we just want to join our rows using an empty space, and we complete that. Then we call our, so we look for each element in that in this loop. Remember, these are table rows. We want to add a timer, so we say active trips dot for each. So we are looping here now. Above, we were looping through our trips. Now this is not mapping, this is just looping, and we want for each to call a timer. So for each trip, you need to start a timer. So as you can see, this will have a trip ID. So this will be trip.id, and also trip.start time. Start time that way. So that's how you call our start timer method. So now we have these two arguments. Now for our timer, for us to select our counter, so remember we did this. So it will be, we will be getting our element via counter, then the ID. We do the string interpolation. So this is how when you call a string using the $sign and the brackets or parentheses, that is called string interpolation. So that's remember, now this is the trip ID that we are adding here. The trip ID that we are adding here. So now that we have our element, hoping that we've done everything right, we can say if we have selected that instance properly and it returns true the value, then the duration will be, so we call our library an instance of our library. So we say moment dot duration. So that will be the moment function instantiated. So we want a difference. So a difference of, just convert this to say moment dot moment start time. So moment in itself just returns the difference between now and the time you've given it. So that should be okay. And then we can update our text, so you can say counter dot text content. So the text content will be, now we want to give it in hours and in minutes and seconds. So what we do, we just interpolate our string here. This will be a long one. Then we say we have a duration dot hours. So this is an object of moments object. So we call this hours. Hour. Then we have another one here. Duration dot minutes. Then we'll call this. This is a function we're calling from moments.js. Then we'll have the final one, which will be in seconds. So this will be duration dot seconds. Don't forget, these are functions we're calling, therefore we need to add those brackets. So that should be okay for us. So we already started the timer. So what don't we have now? So we have our function here, we have our button. And so have we called the update here. We've cleared this, so that should add everything up for us. So let's see whether you have an error in the console. No errors. So let's see how this behaves. So we say, Francis, you can ID number 8. The gender is male. The type is child. Let me just cancel this and let's start. So our timer has started. That's okay. But our name is undefined. So it seems we didn't get the name right. And our styling would need some work also. So let's see where we could have gone wrong with the name. Oh, the name is a typo. So what we need to do, I don't like the date. I didn't also like the date. So what we'll do, we'll format the date. So we'll just call on start time. We can call a function, and we'll just declare that format date. Format date. It will just take parameter of that start time. Then let's see. Let's format our date here. Format date. So we need to quickly just format to make sure we just get the right format, decent one. So we return moment. I want to call the date, and then say we want to format our string. So we get our date here. Parameter string. Let's call it that. So we want to format our date string. Let's call it here. Date string. We want to format it using the following format. So we want the year, then the month, then the date. So for the hours, minutes, that's lowercase, and then seconds. That's good enough. Now it's complaining. So to fix our error in our format date function, so this is a function. We have to declare it as such. That's a function. Then we can try and run our simulation to see what happens. So this is Jean Grey ID number 333, select, that's male and an adult, and start. So our date is fixed, it's well formatted, and our timer is running. We have all our data in our grid, and now we can start thinking of how do we end the trip. And let's just have a second user. So we say Kim Jones, say the ID is 44, and the gender is female, and is a child. So as you can see, the timer is working quite well. We are doing great. So let's proceed to completing our trip. We are actually at a point where we are able to add our trips, our active trips, and start a counter. But what we are unable to do at this point is to end the trip and place it in the completed trips grid. So that is the functionality we are going to build at this point in time. So let's go back to our VS Code and look at our JavaScript. We begin at a point where we want to examine what we already have, and we already have a function that updates our active trips table. we have attached a button to end the trip. So we have an event listener on click for this particular button, the end trip button. At that point, we should end our trip. So without further ado, we will come to trip function and we realize there's a parameter being passed. So we need to introduce an argument, and our argument at this point is the trip ID. So remember, we have an entity called trip. It's an object. So when we take that object and create multiple objects, we are storing them in an array. Remember, we have active trips. Let me just show you at the very top for context purposes. We have active trips and we have completed trips, which are arrays. It means that these arrays will be storing our objects. When they are multiple, that's why we are pushing them inside this particular data structure as an array. So an array has indexes. A typical array in many languages, if not all, begins storing its items, whether they are objects or integers, in indices. So you begin by index 0, 1 up to the length of that data structure minus 1. So that is the concept we are going to work with. And in this point, when we are ending our trip, remember we are storing our data in memory at this point. So we need to find the location of the index of the trip we are working with at this point, the trip that we are ending. So we begin by finding its index in our active trips array. So we define our index and we say from the active trips we want to find an index. So we go through each trip, and this is the advantage of using JavaScript's higher order functions. So we're able to take an array and iterate through it and use an arrow function to execute our functionality. So for each trip, we want to check whether the trip ID is equal to the trip ID we passed in our parameter argument. Then we say, at this point, we need to determine whether the index is available or not. So if the trip index is -1, remember we said an array stores elements from 0 to the length of that array minus 1. So if this index is not there, it will be -1, that particular index. So saying if we don't find it, if it's -1, if it's not 0 and above, then what do? There's no need of proceeding. We just end our processing at that point. We return. So conversely, if it's available, then we continue with our processing and we say our trip is equivalent to active trips, then the index that we got. So at this point now we have our trip. Now we begin manipulating it for all the properties of completed trips, all the properties of our completed trip, our entity that is complete. So the first thing, we'll have an end time. So let's define that. So you say the trip will have an attribute of end time. We're dynamically assigning this. So this will be the new date object. And then we will need to calculate a duration. So we will bring a moment.js at this particular point in time. So we'll say moment.duration. So a duration is basically a difference between two times, the initial time and the end time. So we'll say our duration equals moment. So this is the library that we brought in to ensure that we are not reinventing the wheel while working with time and dates. So as you can see, once we pass our string that we generated over here to moment, it is converted into a moment object that moment is able to work with. It now identifies this as a time variable. So we're saying for that variable, we want to get the difference between that variable and moment trip dot start time. So remember, our active trip already has an active time. Now at that particular point, we need to convert our duration into hours. So it will be duration dot as hours. And you will see the reason as to why we are doing this. In the next line, now we start adding a cost element. So that would be that item that we are adding. Remember, the first thing we've done after finding our trip here, now we have added an end time, we have gotten a duration, and now we are converting this into an integer, so to speak. So if someone went on for about 1.5 hours, then it will show that the duration was 1.5 hours. And now we are able to work with 1.5 by converting the duration into hours. We are able to now start thinking of the cost element. So we say the trip dot cost. So this is a product. It will be the trip dot duration multiplied by, now we bring in our prices setup. So the prices now stipulate for an adult they pay a particular amount, and for a child they pay a particular amount. So we say this will be trip dot customer type. So that should tell you already that customer type should be mandatory in our form, in our HTML form, so that at any given time when the trip is ended, we do not have a null value for customer type. Otherwise, we will never have a cost. So at this particular point, we have everything we need for our trip entity, all the attributes that entity should have. So the next thing is just to update our active trips. Now, before we update our active trips, we need to ensure that we have removed this particular trip that we are working with from the array of completed trips. So what we'll do, we will first create, remember we have an array for completed trips, and we will push in one element. So we will push this particular trip there, and then we will update our active trips and ensure that we have removed the trip with this particular index. So what we'll do, we take our active trips array, then we use the splice method. So what we do, we pass the index, our index, trip index, and then we do a count that our delete count. We only want to remove one item. So as you can see, even from the explanation, the documentation, the number of elements to remove removes elements from an array, and if necessary inserts new elements in their place, returning the deleted elements. So we have managed now to update our active trips array and our completed trips array. So our data attributes, our data structures that we are using to hold our data are fully updated. So we need to update our UI. The first thing to do, we have the method for updating active trips. So we say update active trips table. This is the UI that will be updated immediately, and you will see that. Then we also need to update our completed trips table, and we have not implemented that method. In fact, that is the second method we had planned to implement. So I'll just call it here so that when we work on it, it should be able to work. Update completed trips table. We have only done the definition. Now we need to update the graphic user interface for our table. So this will be similar to the update active trips, only that now it will be bearing the new attributes that we created for our completed trip. So our completed trip will have 3 elements. It will have an end time, it will have a duration, it will have a cost element to it. So I do not want to repeat everything, so I'll just copy and update what we have in our active trips table. I'll update active trips table. So I'll place the contents here, but we have a lot of editing to do. So remember, we are updating a different table, not the active trips. So that's the point where we begin. And we go back to our HTML and look at the ID for our table, for our completed trips table. So the ID is completed trips. So we need to append we need now to update our HTML here, or append our HTML with a row at the table body. Therefore, we'll go to our JavaScript here and update this class. We say we are selecting the table with an ID of completed trips, and we want to select the body section. So at that point now we start looking at the attributes we need. So we need the number, we need the ID number of that individual, the customer, we need a name, we need the customer type, we need the do we need the start time? Yes, we need the start time. And at that point now we start asking ourselves, how do we add the end time? So the end time will be, let me just clear everything here. So those are the fields we don't need. What we need here, so we say we have these. Let me just add 2 more fields. So we will just update the 3 fields. So the start time, the end time is pretty straightforward. End time is pretty straightforward. The format date. Then we need our duration. So this will be the trip dot duration. But you remember now our duration, we converted it into hours, but we need to show the user that in terms of the duration in terms of hours and minutes and probably seconds if we have to. So we would need a function to format this duration of hours. We will define that format duration, and then finally we need the cost. So our cost we'll just present it as 2 into 2 decimal places. So we'll say trip dot cost. Then JavaScript provides us with a handy method. We'll say to fixed. That's a native JavaScript function. To fixed, and we say we want 2 digits. So you can see the documentation is giving us something. So return a string representing a number of fixed point notation. So we want a number that has 2 floating points. So our fixed floating notation is 2, and that will work for us. So the only thing we don't have is the duration, the format duration function. So we had planned to place it here. So let's see how we're going to do it. And the reasoning was do hours and minutes. So we're going to take the duration, which is, as you can see here, this duration is in hours. So we'll say, so we're getting hours here. Then let's say our duration equals, again we bring our moment.js, moment.duration, our argument here, hours. So we want to tell moments this is a value in hours. Already here at this point in time, it looks like it's you're passing it as an integer, but we want to tell moments that this is in hours, so that now it can work on it in its own way during the conversion. And we're telling it just return to us. Let us take our string template. So we want to do 2 values. The first one will be in hours, and the second value will be in minutes. First value will be in minutes. So inside we're just going to call our functions. So for each we have templates. Okay, so we're going to say duration dot hour function from moments, duration dot hour, and the second one will also be duration then dot minutes. It's a very handy function, so I don't think we have any errors, otherwise we would have squiggly lines. So that's how we do it. And I presume now we need to check after updating our trips table. do we need to do anything else? I don't think so. So these, we didn't need these because we're not starting any timer. It should be good to test. So if we have any errors now, we should check them in our console. So our HTML is okay. So we have the ID, name, trip type, start time, end time, the duration, the cost. We should be able to test this. Let me just open the console. It's good practice to click on Ctrl Shift I. Good practice to look at your console. Ideally, since this page is already running on the client, so if we had any errors, we should have seen them here. So let's test it out. Hopefully we don't have any errors, but errors are good for a developer. That's how you learn. And I would encourage you to type as you go, type the code, get your hands dirty, get hit by errors, and try to troubleshoot them. So I'll say James, then identity, we'll have a gender, we'll have John is an adult, then we'll have an ID for him. So this is a female, this is an adult. Now we will test our entries button and see whether it works. So I click on it and we have an error. So that's good. So an errors by default will come under the errors tab on the console, and they're saying unquote type error, cannot set properties of undefined setting end time. So entry. So we click on this JS bit. So we're saying end time equals new date. So you're saying we have defined it wrong, but where now? So yeah, so this is passed. This could be a string, but remember, all indices in an array are integers. So we are passing the wrong argument here. That's why we're having the error, or a type error. So this is the right index that we got. This is an integer. If it exists, it will be definitely an integer. And even if, as you can see, we are testing whether it's -1. So let's pass that index here. Very interesting. It's a learning lesson on how to access arrays. All indices are integers. So we'll start again. And I'm grateful we get those episodes when we are coding and we get errors. As much as this is something I had thought about, we're still getting errors, which is great. So we say, let's add a client here. We say this is a male, this child. We start. So we say Mary Gray, customer, then female is the child. So we say Don Mate is a customer. Assuming if it's a kid, they'll come with their parents' ID or driving license. So the gender there is that, and then we can start. So you can see the function of the update active trips table. It updates this particular DOM, this particular table in the body. So let's end our trip here. So we have ended, but again we have run into an error. So we need to know why we are getting that error. So duration.hour is not a function. Exactly, it's not a function. So we made an error there. If we click on that, so we see duration.hour should be hours, if I'm not wrong. So it's not a function. We don't have a function called hour. So we go back. So this should be hours. That's the good thing with JavaScript these days. The errors at runtime, you're able to get them very fast. So we have updated it. This is hours. So now if we added something else, so if it says it's a male, it's an adult, that we should end this. So it seems we have another error. What is it? So that trip did not come here. We need to investigate whether we are doing it right. So this is update completed trips, we are calling it completed trips.tbody. So we need to know then if we are not getting our data correctly. Updated our completed trips data. So I could just say console.log completed trips. You could just say this is a table to visualize the data well. Console.table. So we'll enter our thing here. It's our client. We just open the console. Yeah. So we'll start, and then we'll end it. So on ending, you see we have our table here. We have all our data. So you can see we have our completed trips. So we have one element. It has the ID number, the name. Oh, okay. The trip status is still new. But that should not be, that should be a non-issue, because are we filtering anything here? No, we're not filtering anything, but it shouldn't be a non-issue because the array has already been populated. And let me just come here and say the trip.status, the trip.status. We have a status. Do you have what are you calling the trip status? Yeah. Say this is trip status equals completed. But I don't know why it's not updating. This function is not running, but I've seen it's running. That's why we can see our data there. So it means probably the DOM is not well done. So document.query selector. Let me see. Completed trips. So this is the table that we want. Table body in HTML. Oh, so this is where we are getting the error. Look at what we are referencing, the active trips. In fact, we should be referencing the completed trips. So that's the error we are getting. Now we should be good to go very confidently. Then we'll say add our client here. Let's say this is female, this is an adult. Then we'll say Donald. Then we will add, select male. So this is a child. We start. Then we should complete one. Yeah. So that's working. Only that now our tables are joined at the hip. Yeah, so that's working. So we have the start time, duration. Probably we should just remove the trip type here because we already have that. So what I'll do, I'll go to the DOM so that we have some space. The trip type, I'll change these. I'll just comment it so we don't require it, and try to remove it. The type, customer type. So don't render that. I'll just remove this instead of commenting that way. Let me remove it. And let's see whether in our styling we can do something about it for our tables. Top, bottom, right, left. Should I say space around? Space around to see what happens. I should say flex. The table should take flex 1. So let's see now. that we're able to work with this perfectly. Okay, so let's add Jane Doe. The gender is female, so dot, yeah. So we have some space. I think that's good. We'll say Duran. Then this is a male, this is a child, start. And you say he's a female, he's a child. Yeah, you start. So this will be, we end this, we end that. So our CSS solution is still not working because the tables are also so congested, and then we can end that. So but our objective is met. We are able, and we will fix that CSS, but we are able now to work with active trips and ended trips. So we have all the variables. So we have our duration and our cost. Our cost is still being tabulated even if we worked with values that are less than an hour. So I'm happy we're able to meet our objective, that we can keep track of the trips, their duration when they start and when they end. And you've seen by virtue of us converting the duration into hours, that in the background is actually a decimal. And in fact, if you have now a decimal number, you multiply by a factor of price, you get the cost. And if I went back to the console, I'm sure we have a lot of tables here for completed trips. You can see where do we have completed trips. Let me just expand on one. Here's the duration. So you can see the duration in hours. So it's very accurate. And that is what enables us to get the cost. So if you multiply this by the cost factor for an adult, then you get you get the idea of. So you multiply this 0.0015 by 100, then you get 0.15. It's pretty accurate. So that's it for this session. I'm hoping we will get another episode where let me try to do 90% and see what we get. Yeah, so our tables have shrunk, but our IDs. I'm just curious about this CSS thing. We need to resolve it. If you were to present these commercially as a project, we need it to be flawless. As much as we need an MVP, we need it to seem a little bit decent. So adult, let's see, try that larger name. But we are done at this particular point in time, doing all our basic calculations and our functionality and our use case. We are done. So we only need now to place these to bring in some persistence so that when you refresh, your data is not lost. I hope we are clear on that. So we could try and work with this. Again, see whether our tables are joined at the hip. Have some decent values there. add that. So I think this looks a bit decent now. So whenever we have values, they are not spilling over to our other table. We have achieved to do pretty decent the separation there. And I'm happy that once you meet the use case, your goal is met as a software developer. So in our next video, we will work on adding our persistence. That should be good. We should be good to go. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. At Gumzo Open Source Podcast, we endeavor to bring you open source content, review, and also programming courses on the side. So that is, we learn, we have everything for anyone in the software ecosystem, anyone interested in the software ecosystem. So we do open source, we create it, and we move forward. We hope you find our content helpful, both the reviews and our tutorials, and we'll be trying to make every concept in web development as easy as possible. So with that, I wind up, and I thank you for your time. I wanted to mention we were able to get our CSS to behave, and the trick was using percentages for the headers also. So you remember we had done on our CSS, we had done a width of 90% to ensure our tables do not touch each other. So for the headers, we also introduced a width of 90%. So therefore that ensured that the headers for each table are aligned properly. So even if I did, say, such a long name, an ID, say that's a male, that's a child, and I did that. So you can see the way the name behaves. So it's at the center and it is well justified. Let me add another one. So that's the good thing with working with ems and then restricting your widths with percentages. So you can see the way it's behaving. So we can end this, and you see our table is not overflowing. So we can end that. So that's it. I wanted to talk about the alignment of our elements, and I have a feeling also we can change. I don't like this particular space at the edge, so we want them to occupy the ends. So we could say the tables, they justify space between. We want them to be on the edge. Yeah, that way. Maybe we could increase the percentages. So we could say, let's say 95. And also make sure for the header we have 95. Yeah, I like it that way. So it's looking good. Thank you for watching.